Hello everyone, and welcome back to my channel. I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying this video. Story 1. I've been babysitting for years, but nothing prepared me for that night. It started like any other job. A last-minute call from the Johnsons, a nice couple I'd worked with a few times. Their 6-year-old son, Mason, was quiet but sweet, the kind of kid who clung to his parents a little longer before bedtime, but never gave me trouble. Their house, though, it always gave me the creeps. It was old, the kind of old that made the floors whisper under your weight and the walls groan when the wind hit just right. The backyard stretched into thick, black trees that swayed even when there was no breeze. I never liked looking at them. Mason went to bed at 8 p.m. without a fuss. I checked the baby monitor, made sure he was tucked in, and settled onto the couch with my phone. That's when I heard it, a faint tapping. I paused, thinking maybe I imagined it. The TV was low, playing some rerun, and the house was quiet otherwise. Tap, tap. I muted the TV. The sound was coming from the bay window in the living room. I don't know why, but I felt a cold prickle at the back of my neck. Something about that sound. It wasn't like a tree branch or a bird. It was deliberate, measured. Tap. I turned my head slowly, my stomach tightening. A small, pale hand was pressed against the glass. My breath hitched. I couldn't move, couldn't think, just stared. The porch light flickered, and in the glow I saw him. A boy, barefoot, thin. His skin was almost gray, stretched too tight over his small face. And his eyes, God, his eyes, were sunken and dark, staring right at me. Then he spoke. Let me in. It was barely a whisper, but I heard it as clear as a scream. I stumbled back so fast I nearly tripped over the coffee table. My phone was in my hand, but my fingers were useless, slick with sweat as I tried to dial 911. The screen blurred. My pulse pounded in my ears. I forced my eyes up. He was gone. I gasped, whipping my head around, searching. The yard was empty. The trees were still. Nothing but the porch light swinging slightly, casting jagged shadows against the house. The operator picked up. I barely choked out the words. There was a boy at the window. He was just there. The cops arrived in minutes. They searched the backyard, the side of the house, even the woods. Nothing. No footprints. No signs of anyone. I felt like I was losing my mind. And then, Megan, a small voice. I turned. Mason was standing at the top of the stairs, his stuffed rabbit dangling from one hand. My throat was dry. Mason, go back to bed. He rubbed his eyes, still half asleep. Was it the boy? My blood ran cold. What boy? The one who watches me sleep, he murmured. Then he yawned and turned back into his room. I stood there, frozen, my heart slamming against my ribs. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed in the hallway, watching Mason's door, waiting for something, anything, to happen. But nothing did. When the Johnsons got home, I didn't tell them. I wanted to. I wanted to grab them and say, "Do you know what your son sees at night?" But the words stuck in my throat. I just told them everything was fine. And I never babysat for them again. Story 2. Babysitting is supposed to be easy money. You put the kid to sleep, eat their parents' snacks, watch TV until your shift is over. That's how it usually goes. But not that night. Not at that house. Lily was barely a year old, a sweet little thing with chubby cheeks and big brown eyes. She didn't talk much yet, but she giggled a lot, sometimes at things that weren't there. Her mom, Julia, was a friend of my mother's. She had asked me to babysit at the last minute, saying she and her husband had an emergency. I didn't mind. Extra cash was always nice. But the second I stepped into their house, I felt it. A weight in the air, like walking into a room right after someone had been arguing. You know that feeling? That thick, unseen tension that makes your skin prickle? I ignored it. Houses can be weird sometimes, and I wasn't about to let my imagination run wild. Julia gave me a quick rundown. Lily's room was upstairs at the end of the hall. Baby monitors in every room. Just in case, she said. I nodded, pretending like that was normal. It wasn't. By 8 p.m., Lily was asleep. I spent the next few hours flipping through channels, half watching a sitcom, half scrolling through my phone. It was quiet, peaceful, until it wasn't. It started with a noise from the baby monitor sitting on the coffee table, a soft cooing sound. I frowned and picked up the monitor. The screen flickered, showing Lily in her crib. She wasn't asleep. She was staring at something. Not at the camera, not at the ceiling, but at the foot of her crib. My pulse quickened. The room looked normal. Just a crib, a dresser, a rocking chair in the corner. Then, through the tiny speaker, I heard it. A low, raspy voice. Don't wake the babysitter. I dropped the monitor. It clattered onto the table, but the voice didn't stop. It kept whispering, soft, slow. My heart pounded in my ears. I grabbed my phone, hands trembling as I tried to call Julia, but before I could dial, the whispering stopped. Silence. I picked up the monitor again, forcing myself to look at the screen. Lily was still in her crib, but now she wasn't just staring. She was smiling. I bolted, up the stairs, taking two at a time, my breath coming in short gasps. I don't know what I expected to find when I reached her room, but the second my hand touched the doorknob, I hesitated. The air was ice cold. I pushed the door open. Lily lay in her crib, blinking up at me, that same little smile still on her face. The room was empty, no sign of anyone, but I swear I could still feel someone there. I checked everything. The closet, under the crib, the window. Locked. No footprints. No sign of forced entry. Nothing. And yet, I wasn't alone. My skin tingled with the unmistakable sensation of being watched. Every hair on my body stood up, my instincts screaming at me to get out. I grabbed Lily, holding her close as I hurried downstairs. I didn't care if I was overreacting. Something was wrong in that house. For the next hour, I sat on the couch, rocking Lily back and forth, keeping the baby monitor on the table in front of me. Nothing happened. No voices. No movement. Just silence. When Julia finally came home, I told her everything. I expected her to laugh it off, to say I was imagining things. She didn't. She went pale. Her hand started shaking. "That's impossible," she whispered. She turned and walked toward the stairs. I followed, still holding Lily. In Lily's room, Julia pointed to the far corner, the one by the rocking chair. "That's where my dad used to sit," she said quietly. "Before he passed away 2 months ago." A chill swept through me. Julia swallowed hard. Lily always giggles at that corner, like someone's still there. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. We both knew. I never babysat for them again. Story 3. I never should have taken a job. It was a last-minute gig. One of those can you please help us out kind of deals. The parents, Mr. and Mrs. Harland, were nice enough. A little jittery, maybe. Mrs. Harland kept smoothing her sweater over her stomach, like she was nervous about something. Mr. Harland forced a smile, but his eyes were sharp, darting toward the basement door every few seconds. The house was old, the kind with warped floorboard that creaked under every step and door hinges that whined like they hadn't been oiled in a century. The kind of house where shadows seemed to stretch just a little too far when the lights were off. "We really appreciate this," Mrs. Harlan said, pulling on her coat. "No problem," I said. I'd babysat plenty of kids before. How hard could this be? Then she hesitated, looked at her husband, then back at me. "There's just one thing," she said, her voice a little too careful. "If you hear any knocking from the basement, do not open the door." I let out a small laugh. Seriously, she didn't laugh back. Her face was pale. "Just promise," she said. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, but I nodded. "Okay, I promise." With that, they left. Sam and Ella were easy. Sweet kids, well behaved. We played some board games, watched a movie, and by 9, they were tucked in a bed. The house was quiet, too quiet. I sat on the couch, scrolling through my phone when I heard it. Knock. A single, deliberate knock from behind the basement door. I looked up, my stomach tightening. Maybe the Harlands had forgotten something. Maybe one of them had come back through the basement. I stood, my socked feet barely making a sound against the wooden floor. The basement door was in the hallway, just past the kitchen. It was one of those old, solid oak doors with a tarnished brass handle. The kind of door that felt heavy even when it was open. I reached out, pressed my ear against it. Silence. I exhaled, probably just the house settling. Old houses did that, didn't they? They creaked, they groaned. Maybe a draft had rattled something down there. I turned to walk back. Knock, knock, knock. Faster, louder, insistent. I nearly screamed. The door rattled. My heart pounded in my chest as I stumbled backward, my hands shaking as I grabbed my phone and called Mr. Harlan. He picked up on the first ring. "Did you hear it?" His voice was tense. "Yes," I whispered. "Who's down there?" A pause. Then, in a low, firm voice, he said, "Don't open the door." My mouth went dry. "What is it?" Another pause. Longer this time. "We don't know," he finally said. A sick feeling twisted in my stomach. "What do you mean you don't know?" Mr. Harlan let out a slow, unsteady breath. "We moved in 6 months ago. The knocking started a month later. We had the police checked. No one's there. But it keeps happening. Every night. The knocking started again. Faster. Louder. Desperate. I could hear my own pulse in my ears. The doorknob jiggled. Something wanted out. I turned and ran. I ran upstairs, yanked Sam and Ella out of bed, and carried them downstairs, my hands shaking as I grabbed my keys. I threw open the front door, the cold air hitting my face like a slap. Behind me, bang, bang, bang. Not knocks, pounding. I slammed the door shut, strapped the kids into the back seat of my car, and locked the doors. My fingers were ice cold, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. From the house, I heard one last, deafening thud, and then silence. We waited. 5 minutes. 10. The Harlans pulled into the driveway, their headlights cutting through the darkness. I stumbled out of the car, still shaking. Mrs. Harlan ran to the kids, hugging them tight. Mr. Harlan met my eyes. "You heard it," he said. It wasn't a question. I nodded. He let out a long breath. "It never tries to open the door when we're here," he muttered. I stared at him. "What the hell is it?" His face was pale. He shook his head. "We don't know," he repeated, "and we don't want to find out." I didn't go back inside. I didn't ask for my payment. I just got in my car and drove. And I never babysat for them again.